Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we are back with the top 8 list in which I rank cards according to several different metrics. But before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers and every single click counts. Anyway, today I wanted to talk about the best uncommons from Wilds of Eldraine. It certainly merits talking about if you're on a budget or if you want to add some cards to your deck without breaking the bank. So I'm going to be talking about these cards, what kind of archetype they fit into in Commander, and when you should consider adding them to your deck. So without further ado, let's get started. And we're starting off with Lordskitter's Butcher. And Lordskitter's Butcher is for 2 colors and 1 black, a creature rat peasant 2/3 with when Lordskitter's Butcher enters the battlefield, choose one, create a 1/1 black rat creature token with this creature can't block. You may sacrifice another creature. If you do, scry 2 then draw a card, or creatures you control gain menace until end of turn. Now, none of these modes are super exciting on their own, and this card may look a little bit underwhelming at first sight, but hear me out, I think this can be a decent role player in certain Aristocrats decks. And that is because it has incredible versatility and provides things you want at any stage in the game. Early on, when you need a board or you need tokens, this gives you 2 bodies for 1. Whilst they're not amazing bodies, it is a clean 2 for 1, and you are getting 2 bodies that you can sacrifice to your other stuff. If you need card draw, or you need to dig for something, or you just need a one-off sack outlet, this also works in that sense because it can just sacrifice a creature when it comes in and go to town. Finally, it can be really good in the late game when your opponent is calculating how to block your creatures and they're pretty sure that they've left enough blockers behind, and then suddenly you play this and give all of your team menace, which throws all of their math off and can win you the games out of nowhere. Mass menace is actually a pretty underrated ability in Commander, so I think it's pretty nice to have it on a 3-drop that is also flexible in terms of giving us bodies and drawing us cards. In any case, this is by no means the greatest card ever, and it's not going to break the format or anything, but I do think it can be a decent role player and it might be worth considering it in certain decks. Next up, we're going to be talking about Rowdy Research. For 6 colors and 1 blue, it's an instant that says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature that attacked this turn. So Ancestral Recall is a very good card in Commander, and this is nowhere near it. Obviously, this is nowhere in the same category as Ancestral Recall, but it does draw 3 cards, and it is often going to draw them for very cheap, sometimes maybe even for 1 mana, at which point it basically is Ancestral Recall. The requirements for this to be good are going to be that you are in a combat meta. It doesn't really matter if you're the one attacking or somebody else is, you will still get the discount on this. 7 mana is a lot to start off with. You want to have at least 4 creatures attack. At that point, you're paying 3 mana at instant speed for 3 cards. That's pretty decent. If you get it for 2 mana, you'll be very happy, and if you give it for 1 mana, you'll obviously be over the moon. It's going to be particularly good if your deck has a bunch of small creatures that are interested in attacking, so it's obviously meant to go in the fairies decks that are making a bunch of token fairies, but it could be good in any token deck in blue. There's been more and more support over the last few years with stuff like the Watcher in the Water for blue tokens, and this is a very good card in those sort of decks. Again, not the most exciting card in the world, but it does have a very, very high ceiling, even if the floor is sometimes a little bit awkward. Next up, I wanted to talk about Woodland Acolyte. For 2 colors and 1 white, it's a creature human cleric 2/2 with when Woodland Acolyte enters the battlefield, draw a card, and it also has an adventure for 1 green that's Mend the Wilds, instant, put target permanent card from your graveyard on top of your library. So this is an interesting one in that it can be used like an Eternal Witness for 4 mana, which is a little bit expensive. You can basically put something on top of your library and then draw it immediately when this comes into play, leaving behind a 2/2 body. That's fine. Then it can also just be played as a 3 mana draw a card creature, which is also perfectly fine. Neither of those modes are particularly exciting, but when you combine them both together, I think this card does just about enough that it might see play in certain decks. Sometimes you just need a regrowth effect that puts something on top of the library if you're really desperate, and this does provide you that. It's also good because it provides that kind of effect whilst being a creature in most zones, so it's gonna be good in creature heavy decks that don't want to include this effect as an instant or sorcery. And the cool thing about it is that you can actually blink it or recur it in other ways to keep drawing cards with it. That's pretty solid. I think this is probably the most questionable card in the list, but I do think it has some potential to see play somewhere. Next up, we're talking about Callus Sellsword. For 1 colorless and 1 black, it's a creature human soldier 2/2 with Callus Sellsword enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature that died under your control this turn. And Burn Together. For 1 red, it's a sorcery that says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to any other target, then sacrifice it. So this card I think is better than it looks initially. I was very impressed with this at the pre-release, and that was because of one slightly overlooked detail that a lot of people maybe haven't noticed, which is that the sorcery part can actually go face. You can sacrifice any big creature you have to deal a ton of damage to your opponent's face if you want to, sometimes even ending the game. The cool thing about it as well is that it kind of gets around the usual problem with these cards, which is that if they get countered, you've lost the creature because you have to sacrifice as a cost. This sacrifices upon resolution, so you're not going to have that issue, which is always nice. And then the actual creature side of it isn't that awful either. If a bunch of creatures have died, say you've played Blasphemous Act or something, you can just put this back into play and it can be a pretty big sized beater for just 2 mana. In that sense, it can be pretty good in Aristocrats decks, although the adventure side doesn't work as well in Aristocrats. I see this as being pretty good in something like Henzi Taurus, where you can sacrifice a big creature to deal a ton of damage and then still play this later on in a turn where you've blitzed a bunch of creatures in. Just seems like a very flexible, very solid card that again takes up a creature slot, which is important for certain decks. Next up, we've got Back for Seconds. For 2 colors and 1 black, it's a sorcery with Bargain, which means you may sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token as you play it, and return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. If this spell was Bargain, you may put one of those cards with mana value 4 or less onto the battlefield instead of putting it into your hand. This is again a card that will probably see play in Aristocrats decks or in decks that are messing around with the graveyard. When I saw this card, I immediately thought of Ratadrabik, which is one of my favorite decks. This card is seriously good in Ratadrabik. You're going to be making a ton of tokens that you're happy to sacrifice, and then you're immediately going to recur one of those legendaries straight back to the battlefield to start the whole shenanigans with Ratadrabik again. This is very, very powerful. We don't usually get reanimation for 3 mana, and this hitting any creature card that costs mana value 4 or less is actually very solid. And all that it asks for you is for you to sacrifice one of your artifacts or tokens that are lying around. So I see this being really strong again in any sacrifice themed deck or in any deck that wants to recur small creatures, and there's a lot of those decks. Moving up on the list, we have Stormkeld Vanguard. For 4 colorless and 2 green, it's a creature giant warrior 6/7 with Stormkeld Vanguard can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, and Bear Down. For 1 colorless and 1 green, it's a sorcery adventure with destroy target artifact or enchantment. Aside from the fact that Bear Down is an unbelievably cool name for a magic card, this card is pretty decent. So the reason I think this card is pretty decent is because it's a sorcery that's going to give us some acceptable artifact or enchantment removal. That's always pretty nice. And then later on we can put a big creature into play that can actually be very difficult to block in certain board states and is almost always going to trade for another card. But what pushes it over the edge is the fact that it's a creature in most zones. There's a lot of decks that want a very high creature count for their synergies and their effects, and this gives you a spell-like effect that is only slightly overcosted while still providing a pretty beefy creature on the creature side. Maybe I'm rating this one too highly and it's not quite as good as I think it is, but it seems pretty powerful to me in certain decks. At number 2, we have Up the Beanstalk. For 1 colorless and 1 green, it's an enchantment with when Up the Beanstalk enters the battlefield and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. So this one has been talked about endlessly, and I think it is very good in Commander, but only if you have the right sort of deck. And the right sort of deck is a deck that is engaging in a lot of discounts for its creatures. So again, a deck that comes to mind would be something like Henzi Toolbox Torre, which is going to be discounting the cost of its creatures a lot. That seems solid because even though you're playing them for less mana, they still count as the full mana value and they're going to draw you a card, which is very powerful. But another of my decks in which this is even better than that is in Emoji Bounty Celebrant. It's just going to be so powerful there because the entire deck is built around really expensive spells with alternate casting costs or that can be cast for cheaper than they should be. It works with Cascade where you're going to be playing stuff for free. It works with Suspend where you're going to be casting stuff essentially for free as well. It doesn't really matter what zone you're casting stuff from. As long as it has a high mana value, you're going to be drawing a card. And there's certainly a lot of decks that are built around discounts or casting stuff from exile or things of that nature. I anticipate this drawing a ton of cards, and I think it's a very solid card in Commander. And finally, and probably to no one's surprise, the best uncommon from Wilds of Eldraine is Stroke of Midnight. For 2 colors and 1 white, it's an instant that says destroy target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a 1/1 white human creature token. So this is almost a strict upgrade to Generous Gift. Generous Gift can hit lands, which is relevant sometimes, but 90% of the time this is just going to be better than Generous Gift. by destroying any non-land permanent, and only giving them a 1/1 as opposed to giving them a 3/3, which can be a relevant body and means that you often don't want a generous gift very early on in the game. Struck of Midnight is much better in that sense. You don't care about using this early on in the game because giving them a random 1/1 just doesn't really matter very much in most games of Commander. It's an incredibly powerful effect, and it's almost a strict upgrade as mentioned over an effect that we already have that is very playable, so this card is definitely the best uncommon in Wilds of Eldraine, and it won't set you back very much money at all to buy this. That has been our top 8 list of the best budget uncommons from Wilds of Eldraine. What do you think about this list? Is there anything that you think I missed or anything that you think I shouldn't have included? Do let me know in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.